Most people think America chose its presidents in ballot boxes and convention halls, but for half a century, the real decisions were made in a hotel lobby. At Madison Square, beneath Italian marble and gaslight chandeliers, men with watch chains and cigar breath gathered each night after dinner. They sat in leather chairs, poured brandy, and counted favors like currency. Reporters called it the Amen Corner, a place where nominations were settled before sunrise. And yet this palace of power vanished without a trace, demolished stone by stone, as if the nation needed to forget how it truly ruled itself. A palace built for proximity. When the Fifth Avenue Hotel opened its doors, it promised luxury, but its true offering was something far more valuable than comfort. The building rose at 23rd Street in 1859, exactly where Madison Square met Fifth Avenue. Not uptown where mansions stood, not downtown where merchants traded. Right at the center, where every kind of power crossed paths twice daily. Amos Eno understood what he was building. A merchant who made his fortune selling dry goods, he studied maps of Manhattan like battle plans. He watched omnibus routes. He counted pedestrians at intersections. He knew that influence required proximity more than splendor. The hotel stood 6 stories tall, white marble facing the street, 200 rooms inside, gas lighting in every hallway, hot and cold running water, an American novelty that astonished European visitors who still relied on servants carrying pitchers. But Eno's true innovation lived in the lobby. Most hotels built narrow entryways, forcing guests through choke points toward front desks. The Fifth Avenue Hotel opened wide. The lobby stretched 90 feet across, 50 feet deep. Italian marble covered the floors. Columns reached toward frescoed ceilings. And everywhere, leather chairs arranged in clusters, each grouping positioned to see without being seen. The first guests arrived in August 1859. Businessmen checking in for meetings, families traveling north from southern heat, lawyers with cases at nearby courts. They registered, accepted their keys, and then paused. The lobby demanded lingering. Something about the light through tall windows, the way conversations echoed just enough to suggest importance but not reveal content. The comfort of chairs positioned to command views of 3 separate entrances. Guests found themselves sitting down before climbing to their rooms. By September, patterns emerged. Mornings belonged to merchants negotiating contracts over coffee. Afternoons drew lawyers rehearsing arguments before dinner. But evenings transformed the space entirely. After 8 o'clock, when gaslights brightened and the dinner crowd thinned, a different species of guest descended. Men arrived without luggage. They shook hands with precision, measuring grip strength and duration. They selected chairs with calculated casualness, always keeping sightlines clear to doorways. They ordered brandy, but rarely emptied their glasses. And they talked in voices just low enough to require leaning close. These were men who trafficked in influence, state legislators staying for the week, federal appointees visiting from Washington, party operatives whose names appeared in no directories, but whose favor could secure a judgeship or a harbor contract. They recognized the Fifth Avenue Hotel's true architecture immediately. The building offered access, not the formal access of scheduled meetings and announced visits, not the public access of campaign rallies and convention halls. Private access, the kind that happened between dinner and midnight, where conversations began without witnesses and ended without records. By 1860, the hotel had found its purpose. Luxury attracted guests. Location kept them central. But the lobby, that wide marble cavern with its leather chairs and perfect sightlines transformed visitors into conspirators. The building did not simply house power, it organized it, concentrated it, and gave it a permanent address where anyone ambitious enough could seek an audience. Ano had built more than a hotel. He had created a machine for making deals, and the men who understood this came back night after night, claiming the same chairs, perfecting the same routines, until the lobby became as essential to governing New York as City Hall itself. The question was never whether power would gather here. The question was whether anyone could control it once it did. The lobby that replaced Congress. Long before sunrise, deals were already finished in a marble lobby where senators learned who they would become. The Amen Corner occupied the southwest section of the lobby, 12 leather chairs arranged in a loose semicircle facing the Fifth Avenue entrance. No rope cordoned the area. No sign marked its boundaries. But by 1862, everyone understood that these chairs belonged to a specific brotherhood. Thurlow Weed sat at the center most nights. The Republican boss arrived around 9, after dinner parties concluded, but before theaters emptied. He lowered himself into the same chair, positioned to see both the main entrance and the hallway leading to the elevators. A cigar case emerged from his vest pocket. He trimmed the end with practiced precision, lit it, and waited. The ritual never varied. Within minutes, men materialized around him. State senators, newspaper editors, customs house officials. They took adjacent chairs without invitation, arranging themselves by importance, those closest to Weed holding the most urgent business. Conversations began with weather and ended with appointments. A judgeship needed filling in the Northern District. Weed listened to 3 candidates' names, asked 2 questions about each man's loyalty during the last election, and gave a single nod. The judgeship was decided. No vote taken. No formal announcement. Just a nod in a hotel lobby, and by morning the governor would receive the appropriate recommendation. The genius of the Amen Corner was its visibility. Unlike backroom meetings in private clubs or mansion parlors, these gatherings happened in public. Guests crossing the lobby could see the semicircle of chairs, recognize Weed's profile, observe the steady traffic of supplicants. The openness created an illusion of accessibility while the reality remained ruthlessly exclusive. You could see power being transacted. You simply could not access it without invitation. William Marcy Tweed joined the Corner in 1863. The Tammany Hall leader claimed the chair directly to Weed's left, a positioning that announced their alliance, despite representing opposite parties. Where Weed dealt in state patronage and federal appointments, Tweed controlled municipal contracts and immigrant votes. Together, they formed a bipartisan machine that could elect judges, place customs officials, and determine which businesses received city paving contracts. The lobby became a second legislature. Bills that passed at Albany often died at the Fifth Avenue Hotel, killed by a quiet word from Weed to the relevant senator. Contracts the city awarded downtown were frequently decided uptown in leather chairs where Tweed sketched arrangements on the back of calling cards. The formal machinery of government continued operating, but increasingly it merely ratified decisions already made beneath Italian marble and gaslight. Journalists recognized the pattern immediately. By 1865, reporters from the Tribune and the Herald stationed themselves at nearby tables each evening, notebooks ready, watching the Corner like astronomers tracking planets. They invented the name Amen Corner, suggesting these men functioned as a political congregation where Weed and Tweed served as high priests, blessing or condemning petitioners. The name stuck because it captured the essential truth. Men came to the Ichis in corner seeking favor. They stated their cases, offered their credentials, and waited for judgment. A nod meant salvation. Silence meant damnation. And the congregation said, "Amen," by returning the next night, perpetuating the system through their participation. But the coroner's power rested on more than personality. The lobby's architecture enabled the system. Those 12 chairs commanded views of every entrance, making it impossible for anyone to enter the hotel without being observed. The marble floors amplified footsteps, announcing arrivals 30 seconds before faces became recognizable. The frescoed ceilings created acoustic dead zones where conversations at one cluster of chairs remained inaudible to the next. The building was not a neutral container. It was an active participant, shaping behavior through design. Guests who might have plotted in private offices found themselves drawn to the lobby's theater of power. Politicians who might have met secretly chose the corner's semi-public stage, understanding that being seen in conversation with weed or tweed carried its own currency. By 1867, the Fifth Avenue Hotel lobby had achieved something unprecedented in American politics. It had become a permanent institution, a physical location where governance happened as reliably as at the Capitol building, but without any constitutional authority, electoral mandate, or public accountability. Senators scheduled visits to New York around corner hours. Presidential candidates included the lobby in their campaign itineraries, knowing that nominations required Weed's approval more than primary victories. Cabinet members sent emissaries to take the temperature of the room before proposing policies. The hotel's nightly guest registry read like a directory of American power. Edwin Stanton, William Seward, Salmon Chase, Ulysses Grant. Each name represented not just a visitor, but a pilgrim, someone who understood that the real business of governing required an audience with the men in the corner. And every night, as gas flames brightened and cigar smoke thickened, the lobby filled with an energy that no congressional chamber could match. This was democracy American style, conducted in leather chairs and settled with handshakes, where the price of admission was knowing which doorway to enter and which men to approach first. The Amen Corner was not secret. It was simply selective. And that made all the difference. When power found its address. By the 1870s, anyone seeking influence knew exactly which doorway could change their life. Ulysses Grant chose room 412 as his Manhattan headquarters. The war hero turned president kept the suite year-round, whether he was in residence or not. The rent alone cost $3,000 annually, equivalent to what a skilled tradesman earned in 5 years. But Grant understood the mathematics of proximity. A permanent address at the Fifth Avenue Hotel placed him within a 5-minute walk of 30 federal offices, 24 banking headquarters, and the Amen Corner's leather chairs. He arrived without ceremony most trips. A closed carriage stopped at the Madison Square entrance. Grant stepped out wearing civilian clothes, a cigar already lit. He nodded to the doorman, crossed the lobby in under a minute, and disappeared into the elevator. By the time news of his presence spread, he was already upstairs receiving visitors in a suite that smelled of tobacco and whiskey. The meetings followed a pattern. Republican operatives arrived first, delivering intelligence from contested districts. Grant listened more than he spoke, grunting affirmation or shaking his head to indicate rejection. Next came businessmen seeking tariff adjustments or railroad subsidies. Grant directed them to the appropriate cabinet secretary, occasionally scribbling a note of introduction. Finally, after midnight, old military colleagues appeared for bourbon and war stories. But Grant's true business happened downstairs. Each evening around 10, he descended to the lobby and took a chair near the Amen corner without actually joining it. The positioning was deliberate, close enough to signal alignment with weed and the machine, distant enough to maintain presidential dignity. Men approached with careful deference, stated their business quickly, and departed. By 1872, journalists calculated that Grant spent more nights at the Fifth Avenue Hotel than at the White House. The statistic outraged reformers who saw it as evidence of corruption. Grant saw it as efficiency. Why travel to 20 different offices when every relevant player passed through one lobby? Chester Arthur perfected the hotel's social machinery. Before his unexpected elevation to the presidency, Arthur lived permanently in room 317. A customs collector with expensive tastes, he understood that influence required performance. Each evening, he appeared in the lobby, dressed as if attending a state dinner. Tailored coat, silk cravat, fresh boutonniere. He never sat. Instead, he circulated through the room, pausing at different chair clusters, dispensing gossip and collecting intelligence. Arthur's genius was his memory for favors. He remembered who helped elect which alderman, who blocked which appointment, who owed whom for a brother's judgeship or a son's military commission. And he deployed this information with surgical precision, reminding men of past debts at exactly the moment their support became necessary. The lobby rewarded this behavior. Its open floor plan allowed Arthur to move freely between groups, appearing to include everyone while committing to no one. The marble floors announced his approach with satisfying clicks of expensive shoes. The tall windows behind him backlit his silhouette, adding theatrical dimension to every entrance. The building itself became Arthur's stage, and he performed nightly to audiences who understood they were watching power being cultivated. By 1876, the Fifth Avenue Hotel had achieved total dominance over American political culture. Republican national conventions still nominated candidates officially, but nominees were selected months earlier in the hotel's suites. Presidential campaigns still traveled to dozens of cities, but candidates understood that a successful week at the Fifth Avenue Hotel mattered more than a month of whistle stops. Reform newspapers still denounced machine politics, but reformers themselves booked rooms when they needed to negotiate with the bosses. The building had become mandatory. Governors scheduled visits. Senators extended Washington trips to include New York layovers. Presidential candidates budgeted for extended stays. Anyone with ambition understood that proximity to the Amen corner opened more doors than any amount of campaigning or policy innovation. The hotel's restaurant fed 400 guests nightly. The bar served 60 gallons of whiskey weekly. The tobacco stand sold 3,000 cigars monthly. But these numbers captured only the visible economy. The real transactions happened in the lobby and suites, where patronage appointments were traded, where Senate votes were promised in exchange for judgeships, where million-dollar contracts were awarded based on correct political contributions. One reporter calculated that between 1870 and 1880, at least 40% of federal appointments in New York State were decided within the hotel's walls. Not recommended, not influenced, decided. The formal machinery of Senate confirmations and presidential signatures merely ratified choices already made over brandy and cigars. The Fifth Avenue Hotel had achieved something unprecedented. It had become more essential to American governance than most actual government buildings. Cabinet members visiting New York stayed elsewhere at their peril, risking accusations of disloyalty or Incompetence. Federal judges seeking reappointment made obligatory appearances in the lobby. Even foreign diplomats recognized the pattern, instructing their American counterparts to arrange introductions to Weed and Tweed rather than scheduling formal meetings at consulates. By the end of the decade, the hotel's marble lobby represented the true center of Republican power. Not Washington, not state capitals. This one room in this one building in Manhattan. And yet, even as the hotel reached its apex of influence, forces were gathering that would expose the contradiction at its heart. A republic supposedly governed by votes had become a system controlled by a handful of men in leather chairs. Democracy had found its address. The question was whether citizens would tolerate what happened there once they truly understood the price of admission. The price of a quiet room. Every conversation in the Fifth Avenue Hotel carried a cost, and someone always paid it later. Thomas Murphy received his appointment as customs collector in 1871 after a single night in room 508. The position controlled 1,500 jobs at the New York Custom House, the largest federal office in the nation. Each job came with a salary, and each salary holder understood the unwritten requirement: contribute 5% back to the Republican machine. The mathematics created a patronage engine generating $75,000 annually, money that funded campaigns, bribed legislators, and secured loyalty. Murphy's meeting lasted 40 minutes. He sat across from Chester Arthur, who still served as a party operative before his own customs appointment. A bottle of whiskey stood between them, 2 glasses, no witnesses. Arthur explained the system with clinical precision. The custom house employed far more men than necessary. Most performed minimal work. Their real function was political, providing jobs to distribute as rewards and salaries to tax as contributions. Murphy asked what he owed for the appointment. Arthur quoted a figure, $25,000, paid to designated party accounts over the first year. Additionally, Murphy would forward the 5% salary kickbacks as directed, no questions asked. In exchange, he could skim whatever he managed from merchants filing import paperwork. Arthur estimated the position could generate $50,000 annually in private profit if managed discreetly. Murphy agreed before leaving the room. By 1872, he had perfected the arrangement. Merchants seeking quick customs clearances paid premiums, sometimes double the official rates. The extra money split 3 ways: 1/3 to Murphy, 1/3 to Arthur, 1/3 to the machine. The custom house processed $12 million in imports annually, creating countless opportunities for surcharges measured in nickels and dimes that accumulated to fortunes. No one called it theft. The system had operated so long it achieved the status of tradition. Everyone understood that government appointments cost money. The only question was how efficiently you converted political favor into personal wealth. The Fifth Avenue Hotel became the exchange where these calculations happened, where men arrived with cash and left with titles, or arrived with titles and left with instructions for generating cash. William Marcy Tweed's permanent suite illustrated the scale. Room 615 stayed booked year-round at $15 nightly, totaling $5,400 annually. But Tweed rarely paid. Hotel management extended permanent credit, understanding that the aldermen controlled contracts worth millions. Street paving, pier construction, courthouse building, every project required city approval, and Tweed controlled the votes. The hotel received its compensation differently. When the city awarded contracts, friendly companies won bids. Those companies charged inflated rates, often triple fair market value. The I, extra money circulated back through political accounts, some reaching Tweed directly, some distributed to loyal aldermen, and some finding its way to the Fifth Avenue Hotel as payment for other services rendered. One invoice from 1873 recorded the city paying $85,000 for furniture in a building Tweed controlled. Investigation later revealed the actual furniture cost $12,000. The difference evaporated into accounts held by men who regularly met in the hotel's lobby and suites. The genius of the system was its diffusion. No single transaction looked criminal. A hotel extending credit to a prominent guest seemed reasonable. A businessman paying premiums for faster customs processing appeared voluntary. A city paying high rates for furniture or paving suggested poor negotiation rather than graft. Only when viewed comprehensively did the pattern reveal itself as organized theft. By 1874, reformers began calculating total costs. The New York Times published estimates suggesting Tweed's ring had stolen $45 million from city coffers over 8 years. Other researchers pushed the figure to $75 million, closer to $1.5 billion in later currency. But these numbers captured only municipal corruption. Federal patronage through the Custom House, state appointments managed through Albany connections, private contracts awarded to political allies. All this happened simultaneously, creating a web of extraction that turned the Fifth Avenue Hotel into the central counting house. The lobby's leather chairs were not free. Every man who sat in the Amen corner owed something to someone. Legislators owed their nominations to party bosses. Bosses owed their power to deliver jobs and contracts. Jobs required government appointments. Appointments required campaign contributions. Contributions required extracting money from either taxpayers or businessmen. The circle closed on itself, creating a permanent machine that demanded constant feeding. Room rates told part of the story. Standard accommodations cost $3 to $5 nightly in 1875. The hotel's 200 rooms, operating at 80% occupancy, generated roughly $200,000 annually in legitimate revenue. But the building's real income came from indirect sources. Businesses seeking city contracts knew to book expensive suites during negotiation periods. The gesture signaled seriousness and provided informal meeting spaces away from official scrutiny. A 3-week stay in a premier suite, costing over $300, bought access to decision-makers worth hundreds of thousands in contract values. The hotel never officially brokered these arrangements. It simply provided the stage where they naturally occurred. But everyone understood the exchange. The Fifth Avenue Hotel charged premium rates because it offered premium access. You were not paying for luxury. You were paying for proximity to the men who controlled public money. And yet the machine's appetite grew insatiable. By 1876, the percentages increased. Customs House workers surrendered 10% of salaries instead of 5%. City contractors paid 20% kickbacks instead of 15%. Federal appointments required larger upfront payments. The system demanded more because its operators needed more, their taste for luxury expanding with their power. Tweed's personal spending illustrated the escalation. Besides his hotel suite, he maintained a mansion on Fifth Avenue, a country estate in Connecticut, and a stable of thoroughbred horses. His annual spending exceeded $200,000, 20 times what his official salary provided. The difference came from the machine, extracted from taxpayers through inflated contracts and phantom jobs. The Fifth Avenue Hotel enabled this extraction by making it social. Conversations about kickbacks happened over dinner. Negotiations about contract percentages occurred in the lobby between theatrical performances. The transfer of money looked like hospitality, friendships, normal business relationships. Only later, when prosecutors examined bank records and traced payment flows, did the criminality become obvious. But in the moment, sitting in those leather chairs beneath gaslight chandeliers, with marble under your feet and power all around you, the system felt inevitable. This was how things worked. This was the price of governing a modern city. And if that price happened to enrich the governors while impoverishing the governed, well, that simply reflected the natural order of talent and opportunity. The hotel's architecture reinforced this view. Its luxury suggested that wealth was normal, expected, deserved. Its openness created an illusion of transparency, while actual transactions happened in coded language and subtle gestures. Its permanence implied stability, as if political machines and patronage systems were as eternal as marble floors and frescoed ceilings. But nothing is eternal, not even buildings that believe themselves indispensable. Boss Tweed moves upstairs. When William Tweed took a permanent suite, corruption stopped visiting and started living there. Room 615 became Tweed's second office in 1873, though some argued it was his first. The suite occupied a corner position on the 6th floor, offering views north toward the emerging mansions of Upper Fifth Avenue and east across Madison Square, where Tammany Hall stood visible 10 blocks south. Tweed requested specific furniture: a desk sized for spreading construction plans, a conference table seating 8, and a private safe bolted to the floor behind a false panel. He conducted business there 6 days weekly. Mornings belonged to aldermen arriving with requests. A ward needed a new fire station. A district wanted street lamps installed. A neighborhood demanded better garbage collection. Tweed listened to each petition, calculated the political value, and either approved funding or explained why the request failed to serve Tammany interests. Every decision was political. No favor came free. Afternoons drew contractors. Men arrived carrying blueprints and bid proposals. They spread documents across Tweed's desk, pointing to specifications and timelines. But the real negotiation happened in numbers spoken quietly. A courthouse renovation bid at $300,000 might cost $150,000 to actually complete. The difference split predictably. 1/3 to Tweed personally, 1/3 to Tammany accounts, 1/3 to cooperative aldermen who would approve the contract. Tweed called this efficiency. Traditional bidding processes took months: competitive proposals, public hearings, formal approvals. His system completed the same transactions in single afternoons. The city got its building, the contractor got paid, everyone else got their percentage. The only losers were taxpayers who never saw the markup, and they were not invited to the negotiations. By 1874, investigators estimated Tweed's suite had processed $40 million in fraudulent contracts. The Ludlow Street Courthouse illustrated the system perfectly. Initial estimates priced the building at $250,000. Final costs exceeded $12 million, 48 times the original budget. Investigators later discovered that the building's actual construction cost under $3 million. The extra $9 million evaporated into political accounts, much of it negotiated in room 615 between Tweed and contractors, who understood that objecting meant never winning another city project. The furniture alone told the story. One invoice charged the city $40,000 for chairs and tables in the courthouse. Market value, $6,000. The difference disappeared. Another bill charged $1 $133,000 for carpets. Actual cost, $30,000. The pattern repeated across dozens of invoices, each inflated to create surplus cash that circulated through accounts controlled by men who met regularly at the Fifth Avenue Hotel. Tweed made no attempt at hiding. He arrived at the hotel in a carriage drawn by matched horses. He dressed in tailored suits that cost more than most men earned monthly. He hosted dinners in the hotel restaurant where wine flowed freely and guests included judges, legislators, and journalists he had cultivated. The openness was strategic, suggesting nothing to hide. And legally, much of his activity remained difficult to prosecute. Paying high prices was not criminal. Steering contracts to friendly companies violated no explicit law. Accepting campaign contributions, even large ones, fell within political norms. The machine operated in spaces where law remained vague, where custom and practice outweighed written rules. But public opinion was shifting. By 1874, newspapers published detailed exposés about Tweed's empire. The New York Times led the campaign, printing figures that shocked readers. $45 million stolen, 125 fake contractors receiving payments, ghost employees drawing salaries for jobs that did not exist. The numbers grew more damning with each edition. Tweed responded by tightening control. He increased the frequency of meetings in his hotel suite, sometimes hosting 3 separate delegations daily. He accelerated contract approvals, trying to extract maximum value before reform pressures forced changes. And he cultivated journalists, offering exclusive access and generous gifts to those who softened their coverage. The Fifth Avenue Hotel became his fortress. Security was informal but effective. Desk clerks recognized Tweed's enemies and delayed their room assignments. Elevator operators reported who visited which floors. Lobby staff noted conversations between suspicious parties. The building protected its most valuable tenant through dozens of small actions that together created an intelligence network. But Tweed's immunity was cracking. In July 1871, the Times published concrete evidence of fraud, printing copies of actual vouchers showing inflated charges. The documents came from a disgruntled city employee with access to accounting ledgers. Suddenly, abstract accusations became specific crimes, complete with dollar amounts and dates. Tweed tried to buy the newspaper. He offered the Times $5 million to kill the investigation. The publisher refused. Other papers joined the crusade, competing to expose additional frauds. Harper's Weekly printed devastating cartoons by Thomas Nast, showing Tweed as a bloated spider controlling city government through webs of corruption. The hotel suite became a trap. Everything that made Room 615 powerful now made it vulnerable. The contracts negotiated there became evidence. The guests visiting daily became witnesses. The documents stored in that bolted safe became a liability waiting for seizure. By October 1871, prosecutors secured indictments. Tweed was charged with stealing $6 million, though everyone knew the real figure climbed far higher. His first trial ended in a hung jury, evidence that his influence still reached courtrooms. But the second trial, in November 1873, produced a conviction. The judge sentenced him to 12 years. Tweed's empire collapsed within months. Aldermen who built careers serving him suddenly remembered they opposed corruption. Contractors who paid percentages claimed they were victims of extortion. Judges who owed appointments to Tammany insisted they ruled independently. Everyone fled the sinking machine, desperate to avoid being dragged down with its architect. Room 615 sat empty through 1874. The hotel continued renting it, charging full rates, but guests who knew its history requested different accommodations. The suite carried a stain now, associated not with power, but with prosecution. Cleaning crews found documents Tweed had abandoned in his rush to avoid arrest. Account ledgers, contract proposals, letters from contractors confirming percentage arrangements. All of it became evidence in subsequent trials. The machine survived Tweed's fall, but transformed. Younger bosses learned from his mistakes. They avoided permanent suites that could be raided. They stopped keeping written records of illegal arrangements. They distributed decision-making across multiple people, preventing any single leader from controlling enough to threaten the entire organization. But they still came to the Fifth Avenue Hotel. The lobby remained essential, the Amen Corner still functioned, and political power still required access to this particular building. Tweed's mistake was not doing business here. His mistake was believing the building's protection was absolute, that marble walls and leather chairs could insulate him from the rising demands for accountability. The suite stayed empty for 2 years before the hotel finally removed Tweed's name from the guest registry. By then, he had escaped prison, fled to Spain, been recaptured, and returned to a cell where he would die in 1878, still claiming he only did what everyone else did. He just did it bigger. The Fifth Avenue Hotel said nothing about its former tenant. It simply repainted Room 615, replaced the furniture, and rented the space to guests who did not know or did not care about the fortunes that were calculated there, the taxpayers who were robbed there, or the machine that ultimately died there. Reform knocks at the door. By the 1880s, the same walls that protected power began to trap it. Theodore Roosevelt arrived at the Fifth Avenue Hotel in March 1883, 24 years old and furious. The young assemblyman had just discovered that a bill he supported, legislation to clean up corrupt tenement conditions, died in committee without a vote. No debate, no public hearing, simply killed, and everyone at the Albany State House shrugged as if this was normal. Someone suggested he visit the hotel if he wanted to understand why. Roosevelt took a room on the 4th floor. He spent his first evening studying the lobby from a chair near the windows, deliberately avoiding the Amen Corner. He watched men circulate, noted who spoke to whom, observed the hierarchy of attention as senior bosses commanded longer audiences while junior operatives waited their turns. The machine's machinery became visible once you knew to look for it, but Roosevelt refused to join. Unlike previous reformers who compromised once they understood the system's power, Roosevelt's privilege made him immune to the usual inducements. He did not need a judgeship. He did not require a patronage job. His family wealth meant contracts and commissions held no appeal. The machine could not buy him because he already had what it offered. This made him dangerous. On his 3rd night at the hotel, Roosevelt walked directly to the Amen Corner and stood before the seated bosses without waiting for invitation. He asked loudly enough for nearby guests to hear why his tenement bill died. The corner went silent. No one spoke to bosses this way, certainly not freshman assemblymen, barely old enough to vote. One of the machine operators explained patiently that the bill threatened too many interests. Landlords would object. Construction companies would resist new requirements. The political cost outweighed the benefits. Roosevelt should learn to choose battles more carefully. Roosevelt called them cowards. The lobby froze. Guests at nearby chairs turned to watch. Bellhop stopped moving. For perhaps 30 seconds, the Fifth Avenue Hotel held its breath, waiting to see if the Amen Corner would tolerate such disrespect. They did nothing, not because Roosevelt was right, but because crushing him publicly would prove him right. If they destroyed his career for asking questions, they confirmed his accusations about machine power. Better to ignore him, let him exhaust himself against the system, and watch him quit like every previous reformer. But Roosevelt did not quit. He returned to Albany and began documenting every suspicious vote, every killed bill, every appointment that reeked of patronage. He gave speeches on the assembly floor naming names, reading financial connections, explaining how specific legislators benefited from blocking specific reforms. Other newspapers, already suspicious of machine politics after the Tweed scandals, printed his accusations. The machine tried isolation. Roosevelt found himself excluded from important committees. Bills he sponsored never reached votes. Senior legislators refused to acknowledge him during debates. The message was clear: cooperate or accomplish nothing. Roosevelt accomplished nothing and did not care. His goals were different. He was not trying to pass legislation. He was trying to destroy the machine's legitimacy, to make its operations so publicly embarrassing that voters demanded change. And slowly, it was working. By 1884, other reformers joined the campaign. George Curtis, a prominent journalist, published a series in Harper's Weekly detailing how the Fifth Avenue Hotel's Amen Corner controlled Republican nominations. He printed names, dates, documented meetings where candidates were selected before conventions met. The series sold exceptionally well, indicating public appetite for exposure. The machine adapted by moving some meetings. Private clubs replaced hotel lobbies for the most sensitive negotiations. Home offices substituted for public suites. The system continued operating but lost its theatrical visibility. Power still functioned, but now it looked embarrassed about functioning openly. Civil service reform accelerated the pressure. In 1883, Congress passed the Pendleton Act, requiring some federal jobs be filled through competitive examinations rather than patronage. The law covered only 10% of positions initially, but the principle threatened the entire spoils system. If jobs required merit rather than political loyalty, the machine lost its primary tool for building loyalty networks. The Custom House became an early target. Reformers demanded that the 1,500 positions there convert to civil service. Chester Arthur, now president, faced a dilemma. He owed his career to the patronage system, but he also faced growing public pressure for reform. In 1884, he signed orders beginning the conversion process. The Fifth Avenue Hotel felt the impact immediately. Fewer operators needed rooms for conducting appointment business. Fewer contractors required suites for negotiating government deals. The lobby's nightly population declined. By 1885, the Amen Corner sometimes sat half empty, a situation unthinkable just 5 years earlier. Journalists noticed the change. The Tribune published an article in October 1885 titled "The Lonely Lobby," describing how the Fifth Avenue Hotel's political scene had withered. The piece quoted hotel staff who confirmed fewer prominent guests, quieter evenings, and a general sense that the center of power had shifted elsewhere. Some bosses tried to maintain tradition. Thomas Platt, who succeeded Thurlow Weed as Republican kingmaker, still kept regular hours at the hotel through the late 1880s. But his influence operated differently. He could not simply decree appointments. He had to navigate civil service rules. He could not kill bills through whispered conversations. He had to mount public campaigns. The machinery still turned, but friction had increased dramatically. The hotel's management recognized the existential threat. Revenue from political guests had never been recorded separately, but everyone understood that premium suites and extended stays depended on the building's reputation as a power center. If politicians stopped coming, businessmen would follow. If the Amen Corner became irrelevant, the entire hotel risked becoming just another expensive accommodation in a city building newer, more luxurious alternatives. Attempts at reinvention began subtly. The hotel emphasized its restaurant's French cuisine. It advertised renovated suites with modern amenities. Management courted theatrical companies and visiting celebrities, trying to replace political prestige with cultural cachet. But these efforts felt desperate, like a former champion insisting it still mattered after losing its crown. By 1888, the pattern was clear. The Fifth Avenue Hotel remained open, still profitable, still hosting guests. But its essential character had transformed. It was no longer the place where presidents were chosen and governors installed. It had become a hotel where such things used to happen, a distinction that mattered enormously to both guests and staff. Roosevelt, meanwhile, moved on to other battles. He left Albany for Washington, then served on the Civil Service Commission, and eventually became police commissioner of New York City. But he never forgot what he learned at the Fifth Avenue Hotel, that power protected by privacy eventually becomes vulnerable to exposure, and that buildings which house corruption eventually become monuments to it. The hotel tried to forget Roosevelt. Staff members avoided mentioning his confrontation with the Amen Corner. Management never referenced his reform speeches. The building attempted to continue as if nothing had changed, as if the last decade of exposure and scandal and civil service reform had not fundamentally altered American politics. But the empty chairs told a different story. And sooner than anyone expected, those empty chairs would multiply until the question was not who controlled the Amen Corner, but whether anyone remembered why it once mattered. When smoke-filled rooms failed. For the first time, deals made overnight unraveled by morning headlines. Benjamin Harrison's nomination should have been simple. The Republican convention met in Chicago in June 1888, but everyone understood the real decision happened weeks earlier at the Fifth Avenue Hotel. Thomas Platt occupied the Amen Corner, conducting meetings with state delegations, counting votes, assembling the coalition that would control the convention floor. Platt selected Harrison carefully. The Indiana senator had the right credentials: Civil War general, loyal party man, moderate positions that offended no major faction. More importantly, Harrison understood debts. He knew his nomination came from machine support, and machines expected payback in appointments and policy. The convention should have ratified the selection smoothly. Platt's delegates controlled enough votes on the first ballot to signal momentum. By the third ballot, wavering delegations would follow the winner. By the fifth ballot, Harrison would have his majority. Then everyone would return to New York, gather at the hotel, and begin dividing the spoils. But the convention did not cooperate. An insurgent candidate, James Blaine, rallied unexpected support. His delegates refused to shift toward Harrison despite Platt's signals. Worse, newspapers published details of the Fifth Avenue Hotel meetings, printing the names of delegates who had pledged votes in exchange for patronage promises. The exposure transformed private arrangements into public scandals. By the fourth ballot, Harrison was losing ground. Platt sent urgent telegrams back to New York demanding reinforcements, additional delegates, someone to break the deadlock. But the machine's tools had dulled. Civil service rules meant fewer jobs to trade. Reform sentiment meant delegates feared being caught selling votes. The old system of quiet deals and honored commitments was collapsing in real time. Harrison eventually won on the 8th ballot, but the victory felt Pyrrhic. Instead of a coronation, the nomination became a struggle. Instead of returning triumphant, Platt faced questions about why his machine nearly failed. And instead of operating invisibly, the process had been documented by dozens of reporters who filed stories about the Fifth Avenue Hotel's declining influence. The pattern repeated in 1892. Grover Cleveland, running for a second non-consecutive term, won the Democratic nomination despite opposition from Tammany Hall, the machine that traditionally controlled Democratic politics in New York. The loss signaled that even on their home ground, bosses could no longer dictate outcomes. Cleveland won the presidency without ever visiting the Fifth Avenue Hotel during his campaign. The message was clear. National politics was escaping the hotel's gravity. Presidential candidates no longer required machine blessing. They could appeal directly to voters through newspapers, rallies, and increasingly sophisticated campaign organizations. The Amen Corner still existed, still met nightly, but its endorsement no longer guaranteed anything. Local politics held on longer. New York State elections still revolved around patronage networks. Judgeships still required machine approval. But even here, the advantage was slipping. Reform candidates won occasional upsets. Good government leagues pressured legislature to adopt cleaner processes. Every victory for transparency was a defeat for the hotel's style of politics. The lobby reflected the shift. Where 20 years earlier, every chair filled by 8 in the evening, now guests had choices of seating. Where cigar smoke once created a permanent haze, now the air cleared by 10 o'clock. Where conversation buzzed constantly, now long silences interrupted by occasional meetings. The building sensed its decline, not consciously, of course. Marble and gas fixtures do not think. But in some metaphorical sense, the Fifth Avenue Hotel understood that its purpose was eroding. The architecture remained perfect for facilitating private deals, but the culture no longer tolerated that function. The lobby still commanded magnificent views, but politicians no longer cared about being seen there. Management tried to compensate through luxury improvements. In 1893, the hotel installed electric lighting, replacing gas fixtures that had served since opening. The change cost $30,000 and produced brighter illumination and reduced fire risk. But electricity also eliminated some of the atmosphere, the intimate shadows where whispered conversations happen naturally. The renovation attracted attention, but not the right kind. Newspapers praised the modernization. Society pages noted the hotel's commitment to current standards. But political reporters observed that fewer bosses attended the grand reopening party. The building was becoming respectable, just as respectability meant irrelevance. William McKinley's 1896 campaign marked a turning point. The Republican nominee ran a front porch campaign from his Ohio home, inviting voters to visit him rather than traveling to meet machines. When he did visit New York, he stayed at a different hotel, deliberately avoiding the Fifth Avenue's political associations. His campaign manager, Mark Hanna, operated from Cleveland, coordinating through telegrams rather than lobby meetings. McKinley won easily, and his victory proved a candidate could bypass traditional machines entirely if he built alternative structures. National campaigns no longer needed the Fifth Avenue Hotel. They needed money, which came from different sources. They needed coverage, which came from newspapers their campaigns cultivated directly. They needed votes, which came from organizing local clubs rather than negotiating with bosses. The Amen Corner held its last significant meeting in November 1898. Thomas Platt hosted a dinner in the hotel restaurant, attempting to reassemble the old coalition for upcoming state elections. 30 men attended, a decent showing. But during dinner, a reporter from the World appeared, notebook visible, asking questions about appointments. The guests scattered immediately, unwilling to be photographed or quoted. Platt realized the system had become unworkable, not because reform had destroyed machines, but because publicity had destroyed privacy. You could still trade jobs for loyalty. You could still coordinate campaigns through loyal operatives. But you could not do it in hotel lobbies where reporters watched and cameras might appear. Power required secrecy, and the Fifth Avenue Hotel could no longer guarantee that essential ingredient. By 1900, the corner sat empty most nights. Occasional guests occupied the chairs out of habit or nostalgia, but no significant business occurred there. The leather had worn thin from decades of use. The marble floor showed cracks from foundation settling. And the gas fixtures, though converted to electric, retained their old brass fittings like artifacts from a vanished era. The hotel management faced a crisis. Political guests had provided steady revenue and elevated prestige. Without them, the building was just another expensive hotel in a city building newer alternatives at rapid pace. The Waldorf had opened in 1893, offering more luxury at comparable rates. The Astor was under construction, promising to surpass both in scale and amenities. The Fifth Avenue Hotel was becoming obsolete, not its physical structure, which remained sound, not its location, which was still central, but its reason for existing, its essential identity as the place where power gathered, that had evaporated. And without that purpose, the building was just 6 stories of marble and brass, expensive to maintain and increasingly difficult to fill. The question was no longer whether the hotel could recover its influence. The question was whether it could survive at all without it. Luxury without purpose. A hotel built for influence suddenly found itself hosting guests who no longer mattered. The guest registry from 1902 reveals the transformation. Wealthy families traveling between summer estates, businessmen attending corporate meetings, tourists visiting New York for entertainment rather than ambition. The names still sounded impressive, still represented money and status. But they lacked the weight of earlier decades when senators and cabinet members filled the same pages. The hotel management studied the numbers with growing concern. Occupancy rates held steady at 75%, respectable but not exceptional. But the average length of stay had plummeted. Where political guests once booked suites for weeks or months, new guests stayed 2 to 3 nights. Where bosses spent freely on dinners and cigars, families budgeted carefully, eating one meal in the restaurant before seeking cheaper options elsewhere. Revenue per guest dropped by nearly 40% between 1890 and 1903. The decline forced difficult decisions. In 1904, management reduced staff by 20%. Bellhops, porters, and cleaning crews found their positions eliminated or consolidated. The cut saved $12,000 annually, but reduced service quality noticeably. Guests complained about slower room preparation, longer waits for assistance, and a general sense that the hotel was stretched thin. Attempts at reinvention followed predictable patterns. The hotel advertised itself as ideal for family visits, emphasizing proximity to theaters and shopping. Marketing materials highlighted the restaurant's cuisine, the lobby's architectural beauty, and the building's historical significance. But these efforts competed against newer hotels that offered similar amenities without the Fifth Avenue's aging infrastructure. The Waldorf Astoria had become the new standard. Opening in 1893, then expanding in 1897, the Waldorf offered 13 stories, 500 rooms, and modern conveniences the Fifth Avenue Hotel could not match. Electric elevators moved faster. Bathrooms featured improved plumbing. Guest rooms included telephones and temperature controls. Most importantly, the Waldorf had no association with machine politics, making it safely luxurious without controversial history. Society followed the shift. Prominent families who traditionally stayed at the Fifth Avenue began booking the Waldorf instead. The change appeared in gossip columns and social registers. By 1905, being seen at the Fifth Avenue suggested either nostalgia or economy, neither particularly flattering. The building tried physical improvements. In 1906, management invested $40,000 in renovations. Guest rooms received new wallpaper and carpeting. The lobby's frescoes were restored. The restaurant underwent complete refurbishment. The hotel emerged looking refreshed but somehow desperate, like someone dressing formally for an event they were no longer invited to attend. The improvements failed to reverse the trend. Newer hotels simply offered more for comparable prices. The St. Regis, opening in 1904, provided luxuries the Fifth Avenue could not imagine. Personal maids and valets, fresh flowers daily, marble bathrooms in every room. The gap between old luxury and new had become unbridgeable. Financial records told the declining story in precise numbers. Gross revenue in 1907, $180,000. Operating expenses, $162,000. Net profit, $18,000. Barely enough to cover mortgage. Payments and property taxes. The hotel was no longer thriving. It was surviving, and barely. The Amen Corner sat empty every night. The chairs remained, positioned as they had been for 40 years. But dust accumulated on leather that no longer felt weight. The sightlines that once commanded every entrance now surveyed a lobby where nobody important passed. The corner had become a museum display of its own former relevance. Some guests found the emptiness appealing. Artists and writers began renting rooms at reduced weekly rates, attracted by the hotel's faded grandeur and cheap accommodations. They appreciated the high ceilings and marble details even as they noticed peeling paint and worn carpets. For them, the building's decline created atmospheric possibility rather than commercial failure. But artists did not pay enough to sustain operations. Management needed wealthy guests booking expensive suites. Instead, they had writers negotiating monthly rates and families stretching budgets across short stays. The mathematics did not work. The building's operating costs reflected its original purpose as a luxury palace. Its revenue reflected its current status as a respectable but unremarkable hotel. By 1907, the ownership group faced reality. The building would never recover its political importance. Attempts at competing on luxury were failing against newer rivals. The location, once the hotel's greatest asset, now posed problems. Madison Square was no longer the fashionable center of Manhattan. Society and business had migrated north, following the expansion of Fifth Avenue into residential neighborhoods that made the hotel seem downtown, old, associated with a vanishing city. Demolition was discussed quietly. not publicly announced, not formally proposed. But in private meetings between owners and investors, someone raised the question, what if the land was worth more than the building? What if the marble palace built for power should be sacrificed to make room for something more profitable? The calculation was brutal but logical. The lot measured approximately 22,000 square feet. At 1907 prices, the land alone was worth roughly $2 million. More importantly, zoning changes now permitted taller buildings. Where the Fifth Avenue Hotel rose 6 stories, new construction could reach 15 or 20 stories, quadrupling rentable space. An office building would generate far more revenue than any hotel. Office tenants signed long leases, providing stable income. They required less service staff than hotel guests. They generated minimal complaints compared to temperamental travelers. And most importantly, commercial real estate was booming while luxury hotels faced increasing competition. The proposal gained support through 1907. Initial architectural sketches showed a 15-story office tower with ground floor retail. The design maximized square footage, providing 300,000 square feet of rentable space versus the hotel's 60,000. Even assuming conservative rental rates, the office building would generate triple the revenue while requiring half the operating cost. The decision became inevitable, not because the Fifth Avenue Hotel failed completely, but because it succeeded insufficiently. A business generating $18,000 annually could not compete against a property capable of producing $60,000 or more. The building's survival depended on recapturing its political importance, and that was impossible. In November 1907, the ownership group voted to demolish. The decision was not unanimous. Some investors argued for one more renovation, one more attempt at repositioning. But the majority recognized what the hotel itself had known for years. Its purpose had vanished, and purpose mattered more than marble. The announcement came in December. Newspapers reported the decision with more nostalgia than surprise. Editorial pages reminded readers of the hotel's historical significance, the presidents who stayed there, the political decisions made in its lobby. But even these retrospectives acknowledged that the building had become a relic, important for what it represented, but no longer relevant to current affairs. The Fifth Avenue Hotel would operate through the spring, closing in June 1908, with demolition beginning immediately thereafter. Staff received the news in January. Long-serving employees, some who had worked there for decades, faced unemployment. The hotel offered modest severance payments, enough for a month or two while they sought other positions. Some found jobs at newer hotels. Others left hospitality entirely, their skills tied too closely to a type of service that no longer existed. The building itself prepared for death. Maintenance became minimal. Why invest in repairs for a structure months from demolition? Guest rooms were no longer renovated between stays. Lobby fixtures went unpolished. The marble floors, once gleaming, grew dull from reduced cleaning schedules. The hotel aged visibly, as if aware it was dying and unwilling to pretend otherwise. Final guests in those last months experienced a peculiar atmosphere. Everything still functioned adequately. Rooms remained clean enough. Service continued professionally. But a sense of ending permeated the building. Staff spoke in past tense about the hotel's glory days. Guests wandered the lobby as if visiting a memorial. The place that once commanded the future now existed only to commemorate its own past. And everyone understood that when the doors finally closed, something more than a hotel would disappear. but the vote to erase it. In 1908, demolition was approved with barely a protest. The final political meeting at the Fifth Avenue Hotel happened in March, though nobody recognized it at the time. 3 state senators met in what used to be Tweed Suite, now stripped of furniture and marked for demolition. They discussed an upcoming vote on subway expansion, nothing significant, certainly nothing requiring privacy. But they chose this room out of habit, muscle memory from decades when important conversations happened here, rather than offices or restaurants. The meeting lasted 12 minutes. They reached agreement quickly, shook hands, and departed. Walking through the empty corridors toward the elevator, one senator mentioned that this was probably the last deal ever struck in these walls. The others nodded without comment. What was there to say? The building had served its purpose and outlived its usefulness. Sentimentality would not change the economic logic. By April, the hotel was accepting final reservations. Management set the closing date for June 15th, giving guests 3 months' warning. Longtime patrons booked farewell visits, wanting to experience the building one last time before its destruction. They brought cameras, a relatively new consumer technology, photographing the lobby and their rooms as souvenirs of a vanishing era. The images reveal an institution in decline. Carpets show wear patterns from 49 years of foot traffic. Wallpaper peels at corners where humidity damaged adhesive. Furniture sits arranged properly, but looking exhausted. The leather cracked, the wood scratched. The building appears tired, ready for rest. Historical societies expressed mild interest. The New York Historical Society requested permission to salvage architectural elements for preservation. Management agreed, allowing crews to remove some marble panels, light fixtures, and portions of the decorative ironwork. But nobody wanted the structure itself. Moving or preserving a 6-story building was technically impossible, and the historical value did not justify that level of effort anyway. A few editorials mourned the demolition. The Times published a piece in May reflecting on the hotel's role in American political history. The article acknowledged both the building's significance and its association with corruption, noting that perhaps some monuments deserved forgetting. The Tribune ran a shorter piece focused on architectural loss, regretting the destruction of such fine craftsmanship. But public outcry never materialized. This was not beloved architecture being sacrificed to greed. This was an obsolete building on valuable land being replaced by something economically rational. The hotel symbolized machine politics, smoke-filled rooms, and corruption. Why preserve a monument to a system everyone claimed to oppose? The last guests checked out on June 14th. Some left early, unwilling to witness the final hours. Others stayed until the absolute deadline, lingering in the lobby until midnight when management formally closed the doors. A few employees remained overnight, completing inventory and securing records. But by dawn on June 15th, the building stood empty, the first time since 1859. Demolition crews arrived that afternoon. The work began on the upper floors, systematically dismantling from top down. Workers removed roof materials, then began breaking apart the 6th-floor walls. The process was methodical, almost surgical, as crews salvaged valuable materials for resale while destroying everything else. The noise attracted crowds. New Yorkers gathered at Madison Square to watch the demolition, curious to see a familiar landmark disappear. The spectacle drew various reactions. Some viewers felt nostalgic, remembering the hotel's prominence. Others felt satisfied, watching the machinery of old corruption physically destroyed. Many simply found the process interesting, marveling at how quickly workers could dismantle what took years to build. By the end of June, the top 3 floors were gone. The building looked wounded, its upper half missing while the lower floors remained intact. Windows on the 3rd floor, previously interior spaces, now opened to empty air. The structural skeleton became visible where exterior walls had been removed, revealing how the building had been constructed, its secrets exposed in death. Throughout July, demolition accelerated. Steam-powered equipment aided the manual labor. Cranes lifted larger pieces. Carts hauled debris to barges on the East River for dumping. The hotel was being erased efficiently, reduced from architecture to rubble, from memory to matter. The marble proved valuable. Quality Italian marble retained worth even as salvage. Contractors purchased large, intact pieces for use in other buildings. Some panels ended up in churches. Others found homes and mansions being constructed uptown. The Fifth Avenue Hotel was being distributed across the city, fragments of power scattered to new locations. The Amen Corner disappeared in early August. Workers demolished the southwest section of the lobby, breaking apart the marble floor where those famous chairs once sat. No ceremony marked the moment, just men with hammers and pry bars, removing stone that had witnessed 5 decades of American political history. By afternoon, the marble was loaded on carts. By evening, the space was empty dirt. Some pieces of the hotel resisted destruction. The main safe in what was Tweed Suite required special equipment to open and remove. It weighed over 2 tons, bolted to structural beams. Workers spent 3 days cutting it free, finally lowering it through the gutted floors to ground level. The safe's contents had been cleared years earlier, but its massive presence testified to the fortunes once protected within. By September, only the ground floor remained. The building looked like a temple ruin, columns supporting nothing, walls framing emptiness. Architectural details that seemed impressive as part of a complete structure now looked pathetic in isolation. A decorative cornice meant to cap the building sat at ground level, its grandeur depending on context it no longer possessed. The foundation came last. Crews excavated the basement, removing the mechanical systems, the storage rooms, the service passages that kept the hotel functioning. This infrastructure was invisible to guests, but essential to operations. Boilers that heated water, pipes that distributed it, storage for coal and ice and supplies. All of it was broken apart and hauled away. By late September, nothing remained but empty land, 22,000 square feet of vacant dirt in the middle of Manhattan. The lot looked smaller than expected. When occupied by the hotel, the property seemed massive. Empty, it appeared modest, making observers wonder how so much history fit in such limited space. A few artifacts survived intentionally. The Historical Society acquired a carved wooden panel from the main staircase, some light fixtures, and a brass plaque from the lobby. These pieces went into storage, occasionally displayed in exhibits about Gilded Age New York. But mostly, they sat in warehouses, fragments without context, beautiful details that meant nothing without the building they once belonged to. More artifacts survived accidentally. Residents across New York discovered they owned pieces of the Fifth Avenue Hotel without realizing it. Salvaged marble in their fireplaces, repurposed light fixtures in their hallways, ironwork incorporated into garden fences. The building had been disaggregated, scattered, reduced to components that served new purposes while erasing their original identity. The demolition cost $42,000, less than the hotel's annual operating budget. The entire structure, 6 stories of marble and memory, was erased for a price equivalent to what Boss Tweed paid for his furniture contracts decades earlier. The proportion seemed wrong, suggesting that destruction was easier and cheaper than anyone admitted. By October 1908, construction began on the replacement building, an office tower, as planned. 15 stories, steel frame construction, modern elevators, and electric lighting throughout. The structure would house insurance companies, law firms, financial services. Respectable businesses generating reliable rent. Nothing political, nothing controversial. Nobody suggested naming the new building after the hotel it replaced. That would have been inappropriate, suggesting continuity between the corrupt past and the progressive present. The office tower received a generic address designation, just another building on Fifth Avenue, distinguished only by being newer than its neighbors. The Fifth Avenue Hotel vanished so completely that within 5 years, some New Yorkers doubted it had ever existed. Certainly no physical evidence remained. The new office building looked permanent, as if it had always occupied that corner. And the stories about the hotel, about the Amen Corner and Boss Tweed and presidents being selected in lobby chairs, those sounded like exaggerations, myths about a past that could not have been quite so corrupt. But the disappearance was not accidental. America wanted to forget how it had governed itself, wanted to believe that democratic progress moved inevitably forward without acknowledging the machine politics that actually determined outcomes. The Fifth Avenue Hotel was demolished not just because the land was valuable, but because the building itself was evidence of a truth the progressive era refused to face. Power had never stopped preferring rooms without windows. It just learned to build those rooms in places harder to photograph. The day the marble fell. As walls collapsed, New Yorkers watched a century of secrets turn into dust. The dust was the thing people remembered most, not the noise, though the demolition generated tremendous sound, not the visual spectacle of a 6-story building being systematically erased, but the dust, which spread across Madison Square in clouds that coated everything within 2 blocks. It settled on parks, benches. It covered storefronts. It infiltrated apartments whose residents thought they had closed their windows tightly enough. The dust contained everything the hotel had been. Pulverized marble from Italian quarries. Disintegrated mortar mixed by workers in 1858. Powdered paint from 6 decades of redecorations. Fragments of wallpaper from 1,000 guest rooms. The residue of millions of cigars smoked in the lobby. All of it reduced to particles suspended in air, distributed randomly across the neighborhood. Residents complained to city officials about the dust. Health officers responded that it posed no danger, just a temporary nuisance from necessary progress. But the complaints continued, less about health than about what the dust represented. The destruction of something significant, even if that significance was complicated, criminal, embarrassing. Some observers found the demolition cathartic. Watching the Amen Corner's walls crumble felt like witnessing justice. Every brick that fell seemed to represent a corrupt deal undone, a bribe returned, a stolen dollar recovered. The building's destruction became metaphorically satisfying, even if it changed nothing about how power actually operated. Others found it melancholy. The Fifth Avenue Hotel represented an era, however flawed. Seeing it disappear forced acknowledgement that time moves forward, that nothing lasts, that even structures built from marble and ambition eventually return to dust. Elderly New Yorkers who remembered the hotel's opening stood in Madison Square watching its ending, calculating decades between those moments, feeling their own mortality in the building's death. Children treated the demolition as entertainment. They gathered after school, sitting on park benches, watching workers swing hammers and operate cranes. The adults supervised casually, allowing this free spectacle while warning children to stay behind safety barriers. The kids did not understand the history. They simply enjoyed watching destruction, the way children always have. Photographers documented the process extensively. Glass plate cameras captured the progressive dismantling. The images show a building in stages of erasure, intact, wounded, skeletal, gone. Published in newspapers and magazines, these photographs created a visual record of disappearance, proof that the hotel actually existed before nothing remained. One photograph became particularly famous. Taken in late July 1908, it shows the partially demolished building with Madison Square in the foreground. The hotel's upper floors are gone, but the lobby level remains intact. The architectural proportions look wrong, the building mutilated. Viewers found this image disturbing, seeing something recognizable transformed into something alien. The caption read, "Progress replacing politics." That framing was typical of progressive-era rhetoric. Demolishing a hotel became progress, as if replacing old. Buildings automatically meant improving society. Nobody acknowledged that the office tower being built would house corporations with as much power as the political machines it replaced. Just different mechanisms for concentrating wealth and influence. Salvage operations competed with destruction. Independent contractors purchased marble and fixtures, reselling to builders across the city. This created occasional conflicts with demolition crews, as salvagers wanted careful removal while destroyers prioritized speed. Arguments erupted on site about which materials were worth preserving and which should be simply smashed for disposal. The most valuable salvage was architectural. Intact marble panels sold for premium prices, especially pieces with decorative carving. One carved panel from the main staircase sold for $300, roughly what a working family spent on rent annually. The buyer installed it in a Fifth Avenue mansion, where it served no functional purpose, but testified to the owner's wealth and taste. Light fixtures found ready markets. Gas fixtures converted to electric use commanded good prices. Brass fittings were cleaned and resold to hotels, restaurants, and theaters seeking period atmosphere. Some fixtures traveled far from New York, ending up in California hotels or even European establishments seeking American style. But most of the hotel was just waste. Thousands of tons of broken brick, shattered plaster, and splintered wood generated by demolition had no resale value. It was loaded on wagons, hauled to the waterfront, and dumped as landfill. The majority of the Fifth Avenue Hotel ended up underwater, filling marshland in Brooklyn and Queens, becoming literal foundation for future development. This fate seemed appropriate somehow. The building had served as foundation for political careers, patronage networks, and corrupt fortunes. Now its physical materials would serve as foundation for ordinary buildings, housing ordinary people. The transformation from significance to infrastructure felt like justice of a sort. Workers completing the demolition were unremarkable men, immigrants mostly, Irish and Italian laborers who swung hammers for daily wages. They did not care about the building's history. They cared about steady employment, about earning enough to feed families, about finishing the job safely. To them, the Fifth Avenue Hotel was just material to be removed, no different from any other demolition project. This lack of sentiment troubled some observers. Shouldn't someone care about what was being destroyed? Shouldn't the demolition feel significant rather than routine? But that reaction missed the point. The building's importance was always abstract, dependent on who occupied it rather than its physical substance. Empty, it was just brick and marble waiting to be repurposed. The total demolition generated approximately 8,000 tons of material. Stone, brick, mortar, wood, metal, glass, plaster. 8,000 tons broken into manageable pieces and distributed across the city or dumped as fill. The hotel had weighed this much when occupied, though nobody thought about weight while it served as a functional building. Quantifying demolition revealed the hotel's physical reality. It had been massive, requiring substantial foundation to support its weight. It had been expensive, with materials worth tens of thousands of dollars, even as salvage. It had been crafted, built by skilled workers using techniques requiring years to master. All this was true simultaneously with its function as a political machine's headquarters. The contradiction was essential. The Fifth Avenue Hotel was beautiful architecture used for ugly purposes. Eliminating it did not eliminate corruption. Preserving it would not have preserved anything worth keeping. The building existed in moral ambiguity that demolition could not resolve, only conclude. By October 1st, 1908, the site was empty. Vacant land where a hotel stood for 49 years. Quiet space where power once concentrated. Open ground where the Amen Corner determined nominations. Where Boss Tweed calculated percentages. Where presidents received instructions. Where American democracy operated through mechanisms it publicly denied. Nothing marked what had happened here. No plaque commemorated the hotel. No monument explained its significance. The historical erasure was complete. The progressive era wanted to believe it had moved beyond machine politics, and forgetting the Fifth Avenue Hotel made that belief easier to sustain. But the dust lingered. Even after demolition completed, even after the site was cleared, even after new construction began, the dust remained. In apartment corners, in park benches' crevices, in the lungs of everyone who breathed Madison Square air during those summer months. The hotel was gone, but not quite vanished, still present as residue, as evidence, as the ghost of what American power actually looked like when witnessed honestly. Power finds. New Room's corruption did not die with the hotel. It simply learned new architecture. Within a year of the demolition, the system reconstituted in new locations. Charles Murphy, who succeeded Tweed as Tammany Hall leader, operated from a private townhouse on East 17th Street. Instead of public lobby meetings, he received visitors in a second-floor parlor, accessible only by invitation. The informality disappeared, replaced by formal appointments and careful vetting. But the business remained identical, trading favors, arranging positions, calculating percentages. The privacy enhanced efficiency. No reporters could observe who visited. No photographers could document meetings. No reformers could count attendees and draw organizational charts. Power was conducted behind closed doors, literally in spaces where observation required either invitation or illegal trespass. Thomas Platt relocated operations to the Manhattan Club. The private organization on Madison Avenue restricted membership to approved Republicans. Inside its walls, Platt reconstructed the Amen Corner's functionality within a legally protected space. Members could gather, discuss strategy, negotiate positions without any public watching. The club's rules forbade guests who were not members, creating an impermeable barrier to outsiders. This was the new model. Private spaces replaced public lobbies. Formal organizations replaced informal gatherings. Legal protections replaced social conventions. The machinery of machine politics continued operating, just less visibly. Democracy was not cleaner. It was simply harder to photograph. Corporate power adopted the same strategy. Where Gilded Age influence concentrated in hotel lobbies, progressive era power migrated to boardrooms. J.P. Morgan conducted business from his private library on East 36th Street, a building that welcomed only those he invited. John D. Rockefeller worked from offices at 26 Broadway, secured behind receptionists and appointment schedules. These locations offered total control over access. Nobody wandered into a private library or a corporate office and sat down expecting conversation. Everyone entering these spaces had been screened, approved, and scheduled. The spontaneity of hotel lobbies, the possibility that anyone might witness or overhear significant exchanges, was eliminated completely. Government adapted as well. Officials still made decisions in private, but now they called it executive privilege rather than machine politics. The president's cabinet met in the White House, away from public observation. Senate negotiations happened in committee rooms rather than lobby chairs. The processes looked official, constitutional, proper, but outcomes still depended on who had access, who controlled key positions, who could influence decision-makers. Reform had not eliminated the Fifth Avenue Hotel's essential function. It had simply distributed that function across multiple locations and disguised it with formal procedures. Instead of one building where power concentrated, now dozens of buildings housed pieces of the machine. Instead of visible gatherings that reporters could observe, now private meetings occurred behind security barriers. The system was less honest, but equally effective. Patronage continued through 1910, 1920, and beyond. Civil service rules covered more positions, but exceptions remained for thousands of jobs requiring political approval. Presidential appointments still depended on machine support. Congressional careers still required backing from party bosses who operated invisibly from private clubs and townhouses. One journalist calculated in 1915 that New York still employed 12,000 workers whose positions existed primarily for political purposes. Street cleaners whose districts did not need cleaning. Courthouse staff whose offices had no work. Inspectors whose inspections were pro forma. All paid from public funds. All expected to contribute portions of salaries to machine accounts. The percentages had decreased from Tweed's era, but the principles survived intact. Some reformers recognized the pattern. Lincoln Steffens wrote extensively about how corruption simply evolved rather than ending. His 1904 book, The Shame of the Cities, documented machines across America, showing how different locations developed similar systems for converting public resources into private benefit. The Fifth Avenue Hotel was gone, but its spirit thrived everywhere. But most Americans preferred believing in progress. The narrative that reform succeeded was psychologically necessary. People needed to think that exposing corruption eliminated it, that passing laws changed behavior, that destroying monuments to machine politics meant destroying machines themselves. The alternative, acknowledging that power simply adapted, was too discouraging. Architecture reflected this self-deception. New office buildings emphasized transparency, with large windows and open floor plans suggesting nothing hidden happened inside. Government buildings adopted neoclassical designs evoking Roman republicanism, associating themselves with civic virtue. Hotels marketed themselves as family-friendly destinations rather than power centers. But the new architecture simply made the same activities harder to witness. Glass windows mean nothing when important meetings happen in interior rooms. Open floor plans do not prevent private offices from existing. Family-friendly hotels do not stop businessmen from conducting deals in those same lobbies, just more discreetly than previous generations. The Fifth Avenue Hotel's demolition accomplished one thing definitively. It eliminated the most visible symbol of how American politics actually functioned. With the building gone, reformers could point to empty land and declare victory over corruption. Citizens could visit Madison Square and see no evidence of machine politics, confirming their belief that democracy had improved. Meanwhile, in townhouses and private clubs and corporate boardrooms across Manhattan, men still gathered to trade favors, calculate percentages, and determine who would hold power. They just did it in rooms without lobbies, in buildings without names that appeared in newspapers, in spaces that were architecturally designed to prevent anyone from remembering that this was how things still worked. The lesson was clear. Power does not require specific buildings. It requires proximity, privacy, and mutual benefit among people who control resources. The Fifth Avenue Hotel concentrated those elements visibly for 5 decades. Its demolition scattered them invisibly across the city. The system survived because it never depended on marble and gaslight. It depended on human nature, on the persistent reality that some people control access to jobs, contracts, and opportunities, and everyone else must negotiate with those gatekeepers. Demolishing the hotel changed nothing except making the truth harder to see, which was perhaps the real goal all along. What the empty square remembers today, nothing marks where presidents were chosen except the absence itself. The office building that replaced the Fifth Avenue Hotel stood until 1978. 70 years after the hotel's demolition, developers raised the office tower to construct something larger. The 16-story replacement lasted only 2 decades before another developer purchased the property in 1998 and built taller still. Each generation erased the previous structure, maximizing density, pursuing profit, forgetting history. The current building knows nothing of what preceded it. Its ground floor houses retail chains, their corporate identities interchangeable across cities. Upper floors contain offices for technology companies, finance, firms, consultants whose business models would have been incomprehensible to Fifth Avenue Hotel guests. The architecture is glass and steel, designed to appear current rather than timeless. No plaque marks the site's significance. Walk through Madison Square today, and nothing indicates that presidential nominations were settled here, that municipal corruption was organized here, that American democracy operated in ways it publicly denied here. The absence is complete, as if the Fifth Avenue Hotel never existed. Historians occasionally publish articles about the building. Academic journals run pieces analyzing machine politics and the hotel's role. Dissertations examine Tweed's corruption or Roosevelt's reforms, with chapters situating events in the lobby's marble spaces. But these writings reach narrow audiences, specialists who already understand that history is more complicated than popular narratives admit. The general public knows nothing. Ask random New Yorkers about the Fifth Avenue Hotel and most respond with confusion. Was that the Plaza? The Waldorf? Something that still exists uptown? The building has vanished so completely from cultural memory that even its name carries no recognition beyond vague association with the avenue itself. This erasure was intentional. Progressive-era Americans wanted to forget how they had been governed. They wanted to believe that democracy functioned through voting and debate rather than through lobby deals and patronage trades. The Fifth Avenue Hotel contradicted that belief too obviously, so it was demolished physically and forgotten culturally. But forgetting came with costs. By erasing evidence of how machine politics operated, Americans lost the ability to recognize when similar systems emerged in new forms. The mechanisms changed, the locations shifted, the rhetoric evolved, but the fundamental pattern persisted. Power still concentrates among people with access. Influence still depends on proximity to decision makers. Democracy still involves negotiations that happen privately before public ratification. The Fifth Avenue Hotel's destruction taught the wrong lesson. Reformers thought they had eliminated corruption by destroying its headquarters. They had actually just eliminated visibility into corruption. The system continued more discreetly in places harder to photograph and report. Transparency decreased even as the appearance of reform increased. Consider contemporary parallels. Fundraising dinners where access to politicians costs thousands of dollars per plate differ from the Amen Corner only in pretense. Private clubs where executives and legislators socialize replicate the Fifth Avenue Hotel's exclusivity with legal protection. The revolving door between government and industry creates patronage networks as effective as any Tweed managed. The architecture looks different. Modern power operates from office buildings, conference hotels, private jets. The settings feel official, professional, appropriate. But the essential transaction remains unchanged. Proximity to decision-makers costs money, influence requires access, and democracy functions through mechanisms it does not publicly acknowledge. Madison Square itself has transformed completely. The park was renovated in 1938, redesigned in 1988, updated again in 2007. Each generation reshaped the space according to contemporary tastes, eliminating traces of previous eras. Trees planted in the 19th century died and were replaced. Statues were relocated. Pathways were rerouted. The square looks nothing like it did when the Fifth Avenue Hotel dominated its northern boundary. But the location retains strategic value. Madison Square still marks the intersection of neighborhoods, still sits central to transportation networks, still occupies valuable real estate. The specific functions have changed, but the fundamental geography that made this spot important in 1859 remains relevant in 2026. If you stand at 23rd Street and Fifth Avenue, you can reconstruct what existed. The hotel's footprint was roughly here, extending back toward Madison. The main entrance faced Fifth Avenue, allowing views north and south. The lobby occupied this space, with the Amen Corner in that corner, the positioning chosen for optimal sightlines. But imagination alone resurrects nothing. Without physical evidence, without cultural memory, without acknowledgement of what happened here, the site is just another piece of Manhattan. Valuable land, certainly, historically significant in ways most people do not understand, but functionally indistinguishable from thousands of other New York locations where the past has been systematically erased. The question is whether this forgetting serves democracy. Progressive reformers thought that exposing corruption would eliminate it. They thought that destroying monuments to politics would destroy machines themselves. They thought that forgetting how power operated would allow better systems to emerge. They were wrong on all counts. Corruption persists because human nature persists. Machines adapt because adaptation ensures survival. Power continues preferring private rooms because privacy protects power. Forgetting these patterns does not change them. It simply makes citizens more vulnerable to their contemporary versions. The Fifth Avenue Hotel's demolition was necessary but insufficient. necessary because the building had become obsolete, unable to compete commercially, expensive to maintain. Insufficient because destroying the building did not address the behaviors it represented. Americans demolished the hotel, but not the systems that operated within it. Perhaps some forgetting is inevitable. Cities rebuild constantly, erasing previous generations to accommodate current needs. Memory cannot preserve everything. Priorities must be set. Not every historically significant building deserves preservation, especially when that significance involves criminal corruption. But forgetting should be conscious, deliberate, and honest. Americans should know they chose to forget the Fifth Avenue Hotel. They should understand what was lost, even if they agree the loss was acceptable. The erasure should not be accidental, a side effect of economic development and cultural amnesia. Instead, the hotel vanished as if it never mattered. And that falsification of history makes citizens less capable of understanding their present. If you believe machine politics ended when Boss Tweed was arrested, you will not recognize machine behavior when contemporary politicians practice it. If you think smoke-filled rooms disappeared when hotels stopped hosting them, you will not question who makes decisions in today's conference rooms and fundraising dinners. The Fifth Avenue Hotel demanded proximity, rewarded loyalty, and punished independence. Those dynamics did not end with demolition. They transformed, migrated, found new architecture. Power still prefers rooms without windows. It just builds those rooms in places we are trained not to look. Madison Square offers no answers, only questions. What did we lose when this building disappeared? What did we gain? Did destroying the monument to machine politics help or hinder democracy? Should memory preserve uncomfortable truths, or is forgetting sometimes necessary for progress? The empty square does not speak. It simply exists, valuable land occupied by structures that serve current needs while ignoring historical significance. The marble is gone, the gaslight extinguished, the leather chairs burned or salvaged or rotted decades ago. Nothing physical remains, except the pattern of how power operates, how influence trades hands, how democracy functions beneath its formal procedures. That pattern was visible at the Fifth Avenue Hotel, carved into its architecture, demonstrated nightly in its lobby. The building made the invisible visible, even if what it revealed was disturbing. And perhaps that visibility was the hotel's real crime, not the corruption it housed, which existed before the building and persisted after, but the fact that it made corruption observable, undeniable, impossible to ignore. Americans could walk past the Amen Corner every day and see their democracy being transacted. That sight became intolerable, so the building was destroyed, and with it went the most honest portrait of American power ever built in marble and gaslight. What remains is absence. Walk through Madison Square. Stand where the hotel once commanded. Look for evidence of what happened here, of how presidents were chosen and fortunes calculated and the nation was governed. You will find nothing, just empty air, occupied only by the recognition that America preferred forgetting to remembering, preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths, preferred the appearance of democracy to the reality of how power actually operates. The Fifth Avenue Hotel is gone, but everything it represented continues, hidden behind new doors, conducted in new rooms, justified by new rhetoric. Power still concentrates, access still matters, proximity still determines outcomes. We just do not build buildings that show us the truth anymore. We build buildings that help us forget. And Madison Square, empty of history, accomplishes exactly what America needed: a place where nothing marks what happened, where absence replaces evidence, where citizens can walk freely without confronting how little their freedom actually mattered when decisions were made in rooms they could never enter. The hotel is gone. The pattern remains. And the square remembers nothing except what we refuse to acknowledge: that democracy has always required forgetting its own foundations, and power has always preferred rooms without windows, whether built from marble or memory.